Lawyers for President Trump were back in court today pursuing legal action that would overturn his felony convictions in the New York hush money case. Last year, Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts, stemming from a scheme to pay off an adult film performer to keep quiet about an alleged affair with the president. He was sentenced to no punishment in the case just before his inauguration, but Trump wants his appeal of the verdict moved to federal court. Joining me to walk us through the latest developments, Zach Schoenfeld, courts and legal reporter here at The Hill. Zach, what happened in court today?
Hey, Drew, it was about an hour-long argument, and we really saw this three-judge panel on the Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals grapple with this new Supreme Court ruling that grants extensive criminal protections to former presidents for their official acts. Of course, this was the ruling that came down last year in July, a few months after that trial where Trump was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records. And so in the wake of that decision, Trump is now hoping to move this prosecution out of New York State court and move it to federal court. And really what his argument all revolves around, for the most part, is this presidential immunity decision. So you saw this judges talking about that, looking for cases that are similar in the past, but really struggling to do so given that the circumstances of the president's case is so unique and extraordinary. In fact, one of the judges at one point called it, quote, a whole new world, seemingly invoking that Aladdin song at one point. So not really a clear direction coming out of these oral arguments, but my biggest takeaway was just the fact that they're having to grapple with this new big Supreme Court decision.
Now, Trump's lawyers have already tried to move this case to federal court. They were unsuccessful, ultimately dropped their bid. Is the difference this time is this is post-Supreme Court immunity decision?
That is the big difference here. As you mentioned, he tried this once before. That was back right after he was charged in the case. So before he went to that 7-week trial in Manhattan, they tried this effort and it failed. But now that he's been convicted and that Supreme Court decision came down, they have begun this effort again. And this is now at the appeal stage. In fact, a lower federal judge has already rejected this second effort. And because this is the second time, and because this is the fact that he's bringing this after trial, the way that federal law sets out the procedure for this stuff to work is it says that, federal officials, when they try to move these prosecutions out of state court, they have to do so within 30 days of being charged, or they otherwise have to show what is called good cause to do it at a later date. So in addition to the normal test that Trump would have to show here, he has to show that the prosecution relates to something under color of his office and that he has a colorable federal defense. So in this case, it's the immunity argument. He also has to show that because the Supreme Court issued that intervening decision, that gives him good cause to actually bring this in the first place. So it's possible that this appeal panel rules against him without even really getting into too much of his immunity arguments.
What's the point of moving the case now? Trump was convicted, but he received no punishment. He's president now and has this broad immunity granted to him by that ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court. Does he just want a clean record?
In many ways, Trump has already won in the fact that, he is back in the White House. And during this whole case and during this whole trial, his team would repeatedly say, it doesn't matter what happens in this courtroom. What matters is what happens in the court of public opinion and at the ballot box in November. And of course, voters saw Trump's conviction and they elected him to the presidency. So in that respect, he's already won. And he doesn't have any sentence. He was sentenced to an unconditional discharge. So this appeal really has no impact in terms of, any punishment. It really, at this point, all is about whether that 34-count conviction that the jury handed down last year at the end of that trial, whether that can stand. And Trump's lawyers believe that they're not getting fair treatment in New York State court. So they believe if they can move this to federal court, these presidential immunity claims might actually win the day.
Did the judge give any indication of how they're leaning? Also, what's next in this case? What's the timeline? And could this, in fact, end up being back at the Supreme Court where justices will determine the application of their immunity ruling that they made previously?
No ruling today, and we don't have a timeline yet of when that's going to land, although I don't think it's necessarily going to be anytime soon. First of all, because of all the unique circumstances of this case, but also just look at the timeline of this case so far. It's not on an expedited schedule. This has been something has been briefed to this court for many months now. This second removal effort actually began back in 2024 before Trump even won the presidency. So this effort already has been taking many months, and it's possible that we have some more months to go before getting a decision. decision. But whenever the decision does land, whoever loses here, they could try to bring this case as the very next step to the Supreme Court. It won't be the first time that the Supreme Court would be called on to get involved in this criminal case, but it could go back to the justices as soon as that ruling lands. But as opposed to so many of these other cases against the Trump administration, which we're seeing move at such an expedited pace, this is moving at that classic slow speed that we're used to seeing the courts do.
And I guess if Trump ended up being successful and that this case was moved to federal court, he could then just have the Justice Department drop the case?
So at this point, his own Justice Department is not the ones actually prosecuting this case. It still is the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. So even if this is moving to federal court, it will still be Trump's personal attorneys versus the local prosecutors in the DA's office. Now, at the same time, I should note that Trump's Justice Department has filed a friend of the court brief backing him. So they're certainly trying to give him some support in his arguments, but they wouldn't actually take over the case or anything. That still would lie with Alvin Bragg's office. So the case would still continue. And Trump, I should also note here, because these are state charges, he has no ability to pardon himself.
All right. Interesting developments. We'll continue to follow. Zach Schoenfeld, thanks so much.